Thank you. Thank you for coming this afternoon after lunch. My name's Dave Salmarsh. I've been with Jamf into my 7th year. Currently the strategist for education. Means I've finally got the job I wanted when I first came here. We're reinvesting in education. I actually took a sabbatical of sorts for about a year, where I stepped out of the roles I had and got to go play in the innovation hubs that we're promoting. And it was actually the best experience of my life. Many administrators in schools, we always say, wouldn't it be great if they got back into the classroom? Wouldn't it be great if they did that on a regular basis? And that practice really helped reinvigorate my desire to be in education. And I think it's helped us at Jamf. I will say one thing before we get started is I really wish I told the panelists, I wish this panel was tomorrow after the opening keynote, because I will spend about 10 minutes painting a bit of a vision of why Jamf believes active learning is so important. It isn't, as we said, stealing my thunder. I wanted somebody to then come up afterwards and really tell you about it. So if you can just envision tomorrow after you see me present and paint a picture of what I think active learning is, know that these people are here today to kind of give you their thoughts behind that go a lot deeper than my vision, perhaps. I'm going to let them each present themselves, introduce themselves, and then we'll get into it. And yes, at the end, we will certainly take some questions. So, John, if you don't mind.
My name is John Wetter. I'm the manager of technical services for Hopkins Public Schools. Hopkins Public Schools is a school district of about 7,000 students in kind of a second-tier suburb of the Twin Cities area here in Minnesota. And really, in Hopkins, we really think technology is part of the core of what learning looks like, is part of really that whole student piece and making sure that students feel comfortable and safe and ready to learn every day in the classroom. So certainly have quite a few pieces, in that mix towards it, and I also have a session coming up on Thursday where we'll actually delve into that a little bit.
So my name's Amanda Kuhns. I'm from Millard Public Schools in Omaha, Nebraska. We have about 26,000 students in our district. We're half Win, half Mac, actually. So my Mac deployment is about 16,000 devices. Our focus is providing the most flexibility for providing resources out to our students in the classroom so they can maximize their teaching and learning experience.
Hi, my name is Christopher. I am with HCS Technology Group. These are my friends up front here. Woot. I work with education customers primarily as a project engineer, professional service provider, and a trainer. I spend most of my time helping be a guide or a Sherpa as folks are discovering these tools like automated enrollment, app deployment, and ultimately learning how to use teacher tools and the ecosystem of tools that are created around that from really great developers, and helping ultimately IT folks and educators learn how to use these and that translate in the classroom to student success. So that's me in a nutshell.
Great. And even though I'm just asking questions, literally as a dyslexic, the hardest thing is to have to read things from a phone. So I'm hoping I can just remember them. Christopher, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off with perhaps your vision or definition for active learning. And for me, having been in education for about 30 years, I think I've called it about 6 different things. But if you wouldn't mind giving us a description.
Yeah, I'll lead us off, and I'll let my fellow panelists kind of, I think, fill in any things I miss. But there's really 2 kinds of learning for students. Traditionally, you've seen a lot of student environments where they just have to repeat information back, regurgitate it. They don't necessarily learn anything. They may have ingested it, but they don't necessarily have processed it. And so I think the easiest way for us in the Apple ecosystem is to look at Apple's initiative of everyone can code. There's in the iBooks and books, there's the whole Create series. The idea of active learning is when a student is an active participant creating and generating content from the things that they're learning in a classroom, meaning you're not just repeating back or checking a box, but they're actually doing things that show that they understand the concept. And sometimes that's used in very creative ways, whether it be drawing or mind maps, or there's lots of ways that you can do it, but they're at the center of the learning experience versus it just being dictated to by the facilitator in the classroom. They're actually a participant and someone who is actively engaged in that process. And you'll see that obviously through their body language, and the results will speak for themselves. Students are going to learn when they're actually showing you how they are able to describe that concept in a way that is new and innovative and exciting. Shows that there's a level of inspiration there, I think, that comes with that type of approach to teaching. That you don't necessarily see when there's just some kind of an evaluation, they fill it out and they move on to the next thing.
Great, thank you. Some initiatives are homegrown. Sometimes they have a teacher that gets behind something. Maybe they get to that 20%, but they never cross that chasm to something they're not purposeful. I know equitable issues, things like that, you need to target them. Amanda, I'm curious on from a level in your district, how was the active learning piece, where's that instigated from and who's behind it?
It's really a joint effort. It comes from the top down, but our role and our department is to provide the tools and the resources necessary, and we have to work in conjunction with our staff development department to make sure that those are properly implemented within the classroom, but they can't do it all. So we actually, even though part of my team's break fix, we actually will go in the classrooms and work with them to kind of help facilitate them and remind them with all the things that they learned the last time they were in training, and then really push that open dialogue between their needs and their wants and what we can provide for them. Yeah, that's
Great. John, same question. Active learning, is it an initiative across the district? What's going on?
Yeah, and like you, Dave, it's been called a lot of different things over the years. And for Hopkins, we really call it engaged learning. It's student engagement, about an engaged classroom, about that facilitator really engaging their students and everyone participating in the learning process. It's not teaching at, it's participating with. And at Hopkins, that comes all the way down from our strategic vision with our district. So it's part of our 2031 plan, and about the classroom, it's about changing what a classroom looks like. It's working with our teachers to lab new ways to make that classroom look different, embracing chaos to some extent in the classroom, so that you have again, that participation in all directions, which I think for some folks from the outside of that perhaps does look like chaos at times, but it's really everyone is participating. You have groups within groups, that collaborative learning process. And for us, that's all the way from the top down, in everything that we're doing, both in the technology side, teaching and learning side, and even to our facilities side, speaking about what a classroom should look like and what the amenities should be.
Great. A little bit of a segue for that one there. I'll share a little bit of a story. Last year, we implemented Innovation Hub in Zimbabwe. I went back and did several days of professional development for the teachers, and about halfway into a day's worth of workshop, one of them raised their hands and said, this is great that you brought this facility and you have this technology, but how do you expect us to do any of this in our classroom when all the iPads and the Apple TVs are in this other space? And I went, well, at that point, I said that of all three things I showed you today, none of them related to technology. None of the things I suggested to you needed technology. And that actually shifted our focus from the Matter Innovation Program. We're in fact opening the building next week when I go there. It's actually 2 rooms. And one is a room with no technology in it, simply so we can show teachers how they can switch to an active learning model without technology. And while I call it, we have a room we're just opening at Jamf. It literally is opening this week if you come visit. It's called the Teal Room. It's technology-enabled active learning. And I believe in that wholeheartedly. However, we can do a lot of things even without technology. It starts with certain changes. So I'm curious if you, 3 of you, have any suggestions that are non-technical related that you've seen happen that foster active learning, not related to technology.
Our district has implemented phenomenon-based science, where they're going and exploring the science the results of the science rather than just, the cause and effect. Those kids are actually experiencing that. So that's one of the things that they're implemented. Maker spaces, which, it's not all drones and 3D printers, but more traditional materials within their maker spaces. And then, project-based learning, where the kids are driving their experiences, and that may or may not be technology-based. And then they have another one that's called a Genius Bar, where the kids actually will go in, they'll self-explore. Again, it doesn't have to be technology, but the kids do their own self-exploration, and they facilitate what they would like to learn during that time.
Yeah, we also look at it, many of those student-driven pieces. We talk about STEAM in every classroom. STEAM shouldn't be somewhere that you're, pulling out or doing a special thing. That should be part of the classroom. It should be part of every lesson in some aspect. And much of that is about making something. That's making a creation. And again, whether it's technology or not, sometimes it's still is better to just get out that paper, get out those popsicle sticks, glue something together, and have something to show at the end of that. That still is a very important part of many of our lessons, and something that we encourage our teachers to do. That we've made an investment in technology because we think that helps enhance those programs, but that's not everything. We still fully expect and want to see those lessons that are happening in classrooms every day, that the iPads are sitting in the corner of the room still. That's perfectly fine, and we want that to be that. We don't want students to be stuck in front of a screen every day either. We see that programs that have a large emphasis on that also are not successful. So it's really about that mixing it and making it, purposeful about what you're using, whether that be technology or not, in your lesson.
Christopher, do you have any tips or techniques, non-technical?
Well, I would say that a philosophy, when you're looking at learning, technology is a medium for learning. It's an opportunity. It's a platform for learning. It is not putting an iPad device or any other platform device in a classroom doesn't mean a student will have a certain affinity to it, and therefore that tool or mechanism will automatically mean that they're going to learn. There has to be intent. There has to be good lesson planning. There has to be an idea that's driving that technology. I always look at an iPad like a canvas. It's really a blank slate, no pun intended, and an opportunity for you to then inject your creative passions as an educator, if you're in IT, really driving home the fact that these devices in and of themselves are marketing may call them magical. And I think they are, but it's what we do with them in the classroom that ultimately determines whether or not a student is successful. And I think that philosophy is very important before we just say, well, we're going to get iPad devices, and when we get them, boom, all of our students are just going to be fantastic learners, and all of a sudden we just have a bunch of really expensive digital books. And so I think having that attitude and philosophy is so important, because I grew up without technology. My story is interesting in that I did not have technology as a high school student. Primarily, my first computer wasn't until 2006. And so I learned just fine. These things are simply aids, and I think that they can enhance, and I think they can do things that we couldn't do with a textbook, and rapid distribution of relevant information in real time. But it's what we do with them. I think that's the cornerstone philosophy to have.
Perfect. John, and you may have thought to bring this up later, but would you please share, and I know you have a session the last day, and I want everybody to come, but I was in their school last week, and I was blown away by what I saw when I entered the classroom. They actually brought me along so that I could help rearrange the classroom to look like an active learning classroom. We actually undid what they did, which was a mistake. But can you explain what's going on in Hopkins, environment and furniture related?
Yeah. So as part of the active learning spaces, we are doing quite a few things across the district to really help bring this forward, as it's continuing to emphasis for us. We are doing some remodeling of our buildings, so we're actually taking some classrooms and tearing down walls and opening those spaces up, providing more interactive spaces to allow students to collaborate through their workshops. We're adding on to a couple of our schools, and anytime we do an addition to a school, we're always talking about wanting to make more spaces for it, and really, I think finally how we're teaching is catching up. our facilities folks laugh that, they made all these open schools back in the 60s and 70s and spent the rest of their careers putting up walls to close those up, and here we are opening them up again. But I really think that we finally have empowered our teachers and empowered our administration to open up learning, period. The space has to be a reflection of how you're thinking about learning, and really thinking about much more open space, much more open learning process, where it isn't I deliver a lesson, we research this thing, we do this project. It's, it just isn't that defined linear process anymore. And in our elementary schools, we're investing into all of our classrooms of flexible furniture, so it's flexible seating within all of our schools. We want students, what we call it, find your learning space. And we want to have 3 different types of surfaces available in all of our classrooms, at least 4 different distinct spaces within those 3 surfaces, so that students can find what makes the most sense for them. Maybe it is a beanbag type chair in the corner. Maybe it is a standard desk. We're not getting rid of all of those. Maybe it's more of a counter type height table for them to sit at and use a balance ball to help keep that energy flowing but still involved in the learning process. So we're investing in that across our district. Right now we're doing 4 classrooms in each of our elementary schools every year. So we've invested, we have that as a budget item. We're actually looking right now, just had a conversation about that, increasing that to try to accelerate that pace over the next couple of years. So we're doing 4 buildings per elementary school, and then we're doing about a dozen spaces in our junior high and high schools over the next couple of years here as well.
Excellent. So when we think about non-technical, and it really does start with that collaborative approach across the district of all groups and not seeing it as a technology initiative. I know MLTI, when I was back in Maine in the early 2000s, it's a learning initiative and focusing and having all groups. But then the philosophy side, and starting with that student-centered and switching teachers from the opposite of what we are here, right? Sage on a stage, everybody in rows and columns, everybody that knows Dave Salmarsh, it's really hard for me to sit still, and there's never a front of the room. When I went in his classroom, the first thing I saw, it wasn't his classroom, but there was no teacher desk, literally. There was something off the side. I said, this was my classroom in the early 90s. There was no front of the room. It didn't matter where you stood. There was no back of the room. This notion of because my last name starts with an S, I always sat there, was ridiculous. The top 4 kids in my graduating class, Brian Carroll, Amy Berliner, you can get the trend. The alphabet kind of determined where we sat, which was insane. When did I start staring out the window? It wasn't the first day of school, I can guarantee it, but eventually, because I was back there. So not changing that environment, but the teacher agreeing to change their philosophy and style of teaching. We didn't make up the Innovation Hub model. I took what we do at Jamf. We have rooms at Jamf with these little tables where 5 people can stand around and work collaboratively. I saw it happen in Copenhagen and across Europe, and I'm seeing it across universities and schools where they're changing the environment. But the leadership has to agree that the teachers are going to look to change their style of teaching, and we have to create that environment. And once we've done that, now we can put technology in their hands to enable that, right? It's not easy to be on one side of the room and not want to have a back of the room, because proximity is really hard to run around and put my hand on someone's shoulder when I've got a class this size. So we wanted to look at technology as an enabler, but it begins with those non-technical concepts. So what technically are you seeing or doing? And I know you're helping people with them, and I know you're implementing stuff across your districts. But Christopher, if you could start, I know you're out there training people on stuff, but specifically it helps with active learning and how you see it help.
Well, I'll say that obviously we're at a Jamf conference, and we had some really amazing demos earlier with the education tools, the Jamf-specific tools that we're really excited about that are a part of Jamf School. So if you're not a Jamf School customer, don't worry. They've announced Jamf Pro will have some functionality. But the teacher tools that have started to show up for classroom management. As an educator, one of the things, the first thing you learn is that you have to manage a class. I mean, while we love seeing students, little minds light up and get excited, there is the functional part of it. Like many of us, I struggle with attention. So these teacher tools are part of management, and they're part of focusing students. Now, some of that is done with things like Classroom, which is a classroom management tool. It's not really an LMS. It's really there to help a student or a participant and help a facilitator to focus on content. And so these tools that have started to appear are really, really, really exciting. They keep the student engaged. They keep them on track. They aid the instructor instead of abstractly guiding someone to a URL. Hey, go to www.blah, blah, 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 / blah, 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 blah. And then, 10 little tiny hands are like, I mistyped that. When we can use technology to bring them directly to a URL with those kind of tools. But along with that, part of technology is formative assessment. There's two big assessments in education. There's your summative, your state testing, your standardized testing, and then those I call them those micro tests, those little microbursts to see where a student's at, and then as a facilitator to adjust and see in real time with some of the Apple School Manager integration, where some of these great apps out there actually can give you data in schoolwork to see how a student is progressing and then be able to come alongside them. I love the fact what you said. I get so excited about this. The desk has become a foxhole for so many educators. My wife is an educator. I've been in the classroom, and we sort of camp out as an instructor, and we sort of hide. We go behind the podium and hope they don't ask any questions, our moment of peace. But in an active learning environment, the facilitator is someone who gets to go around the classroom and celebrate these small victories, because as a teacher, you know what students are struggling with certain things, and to see them overcome it, you can have these very neat little moments of affirmation, and technology enables you to do that. Again, Apple School Manager, the apps that support schoolwork to bring in that data as part of it, and of course, the ability to simply focus them and draw attention to certain content, again, happens to be digital, I think is really, really exciting and oftentimes not noticed by a lot of admins. They don't realize how powerful these tools are in that, I think, learning process.
Amanda?
So I was going to say, in our district, we are a Jamf school district. We've been with Jamf school now for almost 2 years. We implemented our teachers had Jamf School Management right off the bat for our iPads, and then we brought the laptops on this last year. To really see how they have implemented that into their classroom. We throw so much change at these teachers. I mean, every day they log into Google and there's just this new feature, or they get this new app that they have to learn, or some new initiative from the district, or some requirement from the principal. We set up Jamf School in a way that the teachers would just be able to just go in and be able to start off the bat managing those students. And it sounds counterintuitive, but directing those students into their, when they create their own lesson, and they really encapsulate that student into the lesson so they can focus on it. It's not that they don't allow them access to all those different components and areas on the iPad, but they help focus that student into those areas, and they still offer choice within when they build those lessons. But they don't waste classroom time. They maximize their classroom time and the time that they have available with those students by helping streamline and focus those kids in that. And to see how powerful that was for my teachers, we just brought in our 5th grade 1-to-1. We just dropped our 4th grade 1-to-1 this August, and then we're doing 3rd grade this January. And as we roll these new initiatives out, and we say, okay, you guys, we're letting 5th graders, 10-year-olds, take their iPads home. Actually, I missed the meeting today, but they just approved 4th grade to take their iPads home. The teachers are just so much more relaxed knowing that they have this tool to help guide them. And then I also released documentation out to all our administrators on how they can have great conversation with the parents and the teachers about management and capabilities to kind of ease that stress. So when they do let those kids go out and explore and roam and create, they can do it with still some safety, and to be able to have some of those guided conversations to know that they're still protected. And that's when we train Apple Classroom in our district, I will say it falls a little flat beside the viewing the screens, because it's only encapsulating those 4 walls. But Jamf School, through their teacher app allows you to affect those kids no matter where they have a wireless connection. So our big drivers is for our SPED kids, our students that are getting treatments at home and they're not able to come into the classroom. By having that Jamf school experience, that teacher can still be engaged with that student at the home and still encapsulate them into that same lesson and still give that same directive. Another tool that we did, it's kind of on our classroom side, about 3 years ago, we started a directive where we just started untethering everything. So the joke is if it doesn't fit in my bag, I don't buy it. We pulled out all our smart boards. We do have some larger screens in like larger teaching spaces, but it is, you can project, you can be wireless. We switched to iPad stands so they can just throw them in a cabinet, pull them back out when they want to. Absolutely, we don't buy technology unless it's multifunctional. Because I'm not going to tell a teacher, you have to use this iPad stand to do X, Y, and Z. I just say, here's an iPad stand, here's a list of things you can do with it, and you go run with it. We don't tell them how to set up their rooms, we don't tell them we tell them how to use the technology, but we don't tell them exactly what they need to do with it. We give them the tools, and then we have the conversation back to make sure we're meeting their needs. So it's more of a two-way conversation where we don't give them the directive. Right? We don't force that to them.
John, technical things, maybe uniquenesses that you've tried at Hopkins?
Yeah, and for us, it's really about, starting out that first experience too. This morning they talked about in the keynote even that moment of the student first getting that device and what is available to them and what that looks like. And it's that, along with how you facilitate that rollout with students, is so impactful. And just from day one, this is a learning device, this is why we have it, this is the startup, that these apps that we're going to use in the next lessons for the next couple days are there and ready to go, so we're not, needing to introduce any of these other concepts, and really help the teachers along that path with it from a technical means, and making sure they have all that technology ready to guide that learning process. With Apple Classroom, certainly in schoolwork, ready to go to provide that lesson in a sequence that makes sense for the teacher and for the classroom, to make sure that goes smoothly. And really from the technical side of it, it's making sure that all those pieces happen, making sure the Wi-Fi works, making sure that that from step one of that deployment, this is a positive process for everyone in the classroom and all of our parents at home. Making sure that the parents feel empowered too, because you're sending this device home, and now what? Making sure that parents understand that you have absolute rights to look at that device, because even though it's a school device, it's your student's device, it's in your home, you absolutely and you should be taking a look at it. With us, our parents know what the pins are on the iPad so that they can take a look anytime and talk to them about, the iPad should probably be charged in the kitchen or in some common family space, and not necessarily in the bedroom or in the area that's just where that student's at home. So it's really making sure all of that, and constantly talking to parents, that technical piece, helping them with what's available for at home. If I want to filter even school, or even as long as we're having the conversation, help me with the iPhone that I also bought my child, who's our student. How do I do all of this? So really, we look at from the technical side and the technology department as we can help them at least have that conversation with everything in their classroom, and everything that's coming home. Make sure that all of those devices, you're having the same conversation, the same pieces are in place. What is responsible use of that device? What is schoolwork versus what is maybe not, and how to identify that when they're at home.
Something specific that you said to me that I know you use, and it's not Apple technology, it's not Jamf, but you mentioned there's one piece of technology, and I'll back up. Many years ago in my student teaching, I wore a device because it happened to be a school for the deaf. It was a combination. Yep. And that was early in my career when I learned that assistive technology helps all. Yes. And the other piece was I was also in an open classroom, which was no wonder I became a constructionist type of teacher. I started out in an open classroom, and I'm a first sergeant, and I have a outdoor voice, and I can use it when I want to, but I had to learn. that I couldn't do that all the time. I was always drinking vitamin C drink. But you were telling me about the technology you implemented. I'll let you tell your story.
And so in every single one of our classrooms in the entire district, and this is the design basis for anything we do, has audio reinforcement built in from day one, so that the teacher's voice is exactly the same, no matter where the student is in the room, no matter what the makeup is of the room. You talked about where you knew you were going to sit in a room as an S. Imagine where I sat in the room. And that's where I always sat. And to be able to hear the teacher all the time, there's a ton of data behind it, and you can certainly even see it in our classrooms of making sure, every student can hear the teacher, can understand the directions as you're working through something together as a class. But then also when it's time for a teacher to bring back, that small group work back together into a large group as well, making sure that everyone can understand it. And it's not a megaphone, it's not, something to be, using using your teacher voice, because certainly that's from even a health standpoint, as you mentioned, it wears on your throat, and wanting to make sure that all of our teachers have that capability. That's just a design basis, period, in every one of our classrooms.
And I think that's where I want to think about the design-based, where he's talking about having that. I mean, people have it in classrooms so the kids can participate from anywhere. When Amanda said about the untethering, that student agency and giving students their voice is the big piece of active learning, and getting them active and engaged and letting them present, be anywhere. And some Apple technology really supports that. And I think you've already mentioned a lot about Apple technology specifically. Anyone using you're using the Apple TVs, correct? Amanda, and is that?
Correct.
Can
Yep.
you speak to how the teachers embrace them?
Well, with Jamf School, they let's say for the primary students, they want to engage the student and have them show work. They'll just have, instead of having that student walk up to the board and show, or like the old smartboard days, I hated those things, if you can't tell. So instead of having the student waste classroom time walking up to that board, the teacher would use Jamf School to just say, here, I'm going to put the AirPlay code in, and it'll just automatically project up. Another way, a classroom management to keep everybody focused and honest, was to use Apple Classroom and have the viewing screen option open. And then just the teacher would project, I should hold this up, shouldn't I? Sorry. The teacher would project her teacher iPad, and it would keep everybody honest in the classroom. It would keep all the students on focus, because, of course, you're going to get told upon if you're not staying on target. But it's just the fact that the teachers, every time that they, actually, I'm going to go back here. So we have a very modular type classroom. We don't have the solid desks in the row. We have been doing that for years, and it kind of went along with the untethering. We didn't have initiative behind it that would finance it. Every school just started doing it on their own. So it was kind of like the users, they were the teachers that were requesting it. The students were requesting it. Just a lot of our students weren't able to sit still or weren't comfortable in those spaces. So nobody just had to tell them. They just started doing it, and we just started supporting them because it was just the right thing to do. So when we pulled out all those wonderful smartboards, we stopped requiring the teachers from setting their desk up in the front of the class. And so I'm with you. I walk into teacher classrooms all the time. And because it's been 20 years, I walk in, I'm like, where's the front of the classroom? And I have to remind myself, there is no front of the classroom. Maybe I'm looking for her power charger plugged into the wall at this point, right? Yep. So when we walk into those spaces, we're not requiring him to hook up these adapters, right? Keep track of more wires and cables. It stops tripping hazard. It's actually great for that. But it just allows them that freedom to be able to walk around and to teach anywhere. And we actually use projectors. I know some school districts have hooked them up to flat panels, but I don't even like that. I want them to grab that projector, throw it on any surface, take the Apple TV, chuck it over there. If they need to go out to the hallway, I never know and I'm not going to tell them you need to teach in your classroom. So any space becomes a teachable space, because we might not have the funds to rip apart 25 buildings and remodel them to reopen everything that's recently been closed. So just providing just that flexibility for them to make their own decisions, for the teachers. They can make the decisions on what they need to do with their students at the time in the classroom. And it's exciting when the kids can wirelessly project themselves. They like that much better.
I think you hit on something. The ability to have flexibility and the technology. I read an article recently where they said you can't really do that. And I think her description, she also described how, our classrooms, they go outside. I had kids in the library, I had kids down the hall, this notion that sometimes you need that and that flexibility and space. I have two for John. I'm not going to ask him because I don't want to ruin his presentation on Thursday, so I'll save those. We've covered a few things. I think I'd like to just go through before we get to questions on the biggest challenges you've seen and things you hopefully mitigated, because usually I try not to make the same mistake a third time. So perhaps you have a challenge and something, how you overcame it, or maybe you saw staff. And Christopher, if we could start with you.
Yeah, a lot of total cost of ownership. When you're looking at education, a lot of money is used, and of course you always want to be frugal, efficient, cost-effective. One of the things that I think needs to, obviously your philosophy is so important, but also looking at technology from a total cost of ownership. To me, one of the unsung heroes in the ecosystem is the Apple TV. In my opinion, it's single-handedly one of the most easy devices. If you saw last year's demo, just looking back was incredibly impressive. A lot of folks are not aware of the capability of technology, like the fact that with power, HDMI, and Ethernet, I can deploy not just dozens, not just hundreds, but thousands of Apple TV devices into classrooms and using conference mode, leveraging Classroom to display content. And a lot of folks just aren't aware of how powerful that is. And I think it's partly because we are entrenched that a smart board is innately more intelligent of a decision by its name. And in certain cases, the total cost of ownership for a pretty high quality TV with an Apple TV is ultimately going to bring so much more value, a lot more for versatility, and again, to improve the celebration of a student learning, because when a student has success, you have to understand the biggest roadblock is not just the cost, but the emotions of a student. The reason I hate not the chalkboard or the smart TVs or anything is the fact that as a young child, I was incredibly insecure. I actually had a lisp, and so anytime they were calling me to answer, it was like a panic attack. So not only did I have a lisp, I had anxiety in a lisp, and so it was just an absolute disaster. But then all of a sudden now I was walking around the school, and this was so emotional to me and just so powerful. And I'm watching as the teacher is having the student actually display the content, celebrating the already known victory, without the student having to experience the anxiety and the fear of getting up in front of the classroom. And I thought to myself, when we think about technology, there's the cost aspect. As educators, we have to appreciate that finances are limited, but there is the emotional cost when we don't quite get learning right and we don't use the tools like we could. And I think that's a part that we have to keep in mind, because all of this, the reason we're here is because of students. Everything that we do, and I think the biggest challenge that we have is to remember, why are we doing this? Is ultimately to help those students to learn in a way that is meaningful to them, not just satisfying to us. And I think that's really important. That, to me, clears the way for a lot of roadblocks. And I saw that in real time. It was just like so powerful to see, and it brought back so many personal memories. So that's my perspective, is cost of ownership, but also the fact that this is for students.
Okay, so I'm going to go with, in my environment, I'm finding it difficult to have open, honest dialogue about what teachers need, what administrators need, districts are really good about telling us what they want and what they need, but I'm having a hard time getting that information. So that's something that I have found as a challenge, where they almost don't, I've been in the district for a while, and they almost don't want to let me down when I go in and talk to them. They don't want to tell me anything's wrong. They don't want to tell me that something didn't work. And so, I don't want to say we troll them, but we do kind of go in their classroom and we watch, we'll be working on something, and then we watch and we learn, and then we'll take that back, or we'll have discussions, and I'll be like, hey, I saw you struggled with that. What do you think about that? And just constantly reassuring them that they didn't do something wrong. Like, we can learn from this. It's never a failure unless you don't act on it. Like, we have to learn, and we have to make constant improvements. And we need that open dialogue. So I've been spending most of this school year going around and having
those conversations, if I find out a principal has had a pretty rough week with dealing with student behavior, well, then I'm going to circle back to that principal and have those conversations about, hey, these are the things that you can do, or what do you need from me? Keeping that relationship between the technology department and what's going on in the classroom. And that's the same thing with the classroom teachers. I'll just go into a random classroom teacher's classroom and just say, hey, what do you need? Like, what would work better for you? I think they get really surprised because normally you have to work on some kind of advisory board or something to have somebody come in and listen to you. So they get really excited when you just one-on-one have that conversation and really find out what their stories are. So I call it pulling taffy. Once they open up, they'll do pretty good. And then I spend a lot of time with our accessibilities and our SPED department, assistive tech, trying to figure out what they need. And it's amazing. You can offer 1 or 2 tools for a student and better their experience and better what they're getting out of school, and it keeps multiplying. So what I take that back, I am a spreadsheet person, so I can go in and I can prove budget and I can keep our costs low. I can maximize what they give me. But what I find lacking between what I said before about getting the user story and about doing my spreadsheets is I can do that quantitative analysis that says this is what we need to put in the classroom, this is the tools that our teachers need, but getting that qualitative information out of the classroom, pulling those user stories out, and putting it in a way that I can get district funding behind it. That is a trick. I can usually sell it. I don't get told no that often, but it's hard to find the right thing to focus on and the right user stories, and so that's been a challenge because it's not a blanket solution when you're looking at this kind of model. You have to be flexible.
John, I'm going to do you a favor.
Yeah.
Can you save your biggest challenge, and what you did for your presentation
Absolutely.
on Thursday?
All
Ha!
right.
Tease. We only have a couple minutes, so I'd like some people, if you have some questions, to come up to the podiums if you have questions. And if you are coming up to ask a question, we have microphones on either side. I actually appreciated knowing he has that session. I want to ask him them all 5 more questions. And I'm pausing because wait time is my number one thing when I walk in and say, you want to do active learning? You ask a question. Don't repeat what Mr. Saltmarsh said because you think the kids didn't understand it. Just count to 8. Because there's a good chance that if you wait, somebody's going to ask a question. And if you ask them to answer within 1 second, you get the same people. The second one is don't touch. We love to touch other people's devices. We love to reach over their shoulder and touch their devices for them. And then thirdly, don't answer their question. I guarantee you, go somewhere later when you go home, go stand next to a child, ask them their name. I guarantee the adult will speak up for them. You cannot, so don't answer their question for them, don't touch their device, and give them time to think so they can come up with a question like she's going to.
Boom.
Districts are investing a lot of money in devices, flexible classrooms, digital curriculum, and I've found that teachers are all at a different place in their readiness to really integrate technology instruction, but there's often not a lot of money left over for professional development. What strategies are your districts using to approach this?
You want to start?
So one, we bring them in for full-day training sessions before we do their deployments. We do everything from instructional solutions for them. We do classroom management. We do deployment with them. We go through the district's philosophy so they understand the why of we're bringing the equipment in. We also have an instructional coach that's in the building that travels between the classrooms. It's kind of our teacher librarian's role is also been untethered from the media center. They now float between classrooms and help facilitate those lessons with the teachers. They don't actually write them, but they go in, insert themselves, and provide themselves as a resource. That has probably been our number one win, just because instead of going to the lab to get tech, right, that
experience comes to you, and then they end up building it together as a team. And what was the first part with hers?
It's just investing in the cost.
Okay.
You want to go?
Yeah. At Hopkins, we really look at it from the project plan going into any sort of initiative, even though I don't allow myself to use that word because that word just gets crazy. So anytime that you're working on something big coming to your schools, that has to be part of the project plan. It's like we require a total cost of ownership review before we can go forward with anything. And so that total cost of ownership has to include the management of the devices. So how are you going to manage them? So your MDM costs, your break fix, staffing, as well as your professional development. And so for us, we require that to be part of that calculation for any project coming in. That you don't go past step 2 unless you've included all of those pieces that you really need to be successful with. Because we know, and I think that's one of the number one things we've seen is failings of technology, and that's kind of your code red word right there, is when you see a technology initiative coming into your building is really like, okay, that's an outside thing coming in that I'm not really ready for, or nor did I maybe ask for, and so how are you going to help me? So now immediately you're putting walls up, and people are on the defensive with that. Whereas people are very different if you've asked them about that. And I completely agree with what Amanda said of people, when you go and talk to them, they tell you what they think you want to hear and how to really pull that out of what's really happening in the classrooms and how you can help them. We work hard on pushing in support into classrooms, much like we're working with our student services. Instead of students being pulled out of the classroom to go do something, we're very much a push-in focused. And so for our professional development, we do a lot of push-in and co-teaching. So all of our technology integration folks really are co-teachers for our staff, and they're pushing into classrooms to really help talk about, here's another way that this lesson can look like in your classroom. And we're doing that much from a co-teaching as well as providing opportunities outside of the classroom. We worked closely with Apple and actually providing teacher resources in the Apple Store as well. So teachers can actually go to a Hopkins-focused classroom where the folks at Apple know the technologies we're using, and they can actually sit down and even have those one-on-one sessions with an Apple professional to talk about a specific application or something that they're wanting to do as well.
Yeah, mine will be real quick. Self-service opportunities for folks are appleteacher.apple.com. Lots of great resources. Apple.com/education is the gateway to not only amazing resources for the technical aspects, but also for curriculum design. Many of those links will lead you to the Apple Bookstore, where they have collections for education that, again, go over that everyone can create. And there's just a formative assessment apps out there. So if you're looking for professional development that is when you don't have a very large budget, those are great resources. My wife is a teacher, and one of the things that I did to help her school, which was not necessarily open to Apple technology, was to guide her through that process as I gave her her class a set of iPads so that she could start to use these tools, Apple TV. And my wife, who is around me, doesn't necessarily absorb by proximity all of the knowledge that I have. And so she started to ask questions, and again, there was no budget. So one of the things I said was like, well, honey, let's go to apple.com and let's take a look at all the resources. And it was just like, wow, there's a lot of stuff that can at least get you started. And then I think move to a planned approach where professional learning can be involved, because I think that that's so important, that leadership, again, it's about how do you drive this process, to have leadership involved, saying that's very, very important. Yeah.
Right at time. First of all, I'm blown away. Thank you that there's so many people that came in here that are interested in the topic. That makes my day. Thank you very much for all the presenters for sharing. Thank you.